Hello and welcome to another Six Sages Gaming set review. Today we're going to be talking about Ice, and I don't want you to freeze up with anticipation, so today we're going to be jumping right into it. Up first we have Weiss, the 6-drop 8K. And a quick note, this set is all about getting to play stuff for free, whatever that's about. So when it comes in the field, you get to play a forward of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field, which can be great for things like Sarah or some of the other cheaper costs. But what's really great about this card is that when he attacks, he gets plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. For those of us that have been playing Ice for a while now, the set really does lack a solid attacker. Now, of course, if you have Laguna or if you have the rare versions of Squall and Laguna on the field together, they do get bigger. That's great, but by itself, Weiss is able to swing for 10k and is going to take out a couple of forwards that are trying to block his way. So I can see this card seeing play as a high-end curve for it. I know realistically this kind of card wants to be in a deck that it goes with, and we'll talk about the other card a little bit later, where you want to be playing 3 and 3 just so you have the increased likelihood of seeing them both. Whether this card is going to be played a lot, I'm not necessarily sold on it, but I would not be surprised if someone gets the combo to work with this and his partner. So that is left to be seen. Up next, we have our first legendary, Vayne. Now, this is a card that I really like. A lot of people are talking about Emperor, which we had previously discussed. And Vayne is a 4-drop AK, so again, fine on the stats. Forwards that cost 5 or more your opponent controls won't activate during your opponent's active phase. So it's going to stop things like Tifa. It's going to stop things like Emperor. So Vayne is in this very interesting spot where, depending on the meta and depending on what your opponent's playing, this can either go from a wonderful card that every deck is going to want to play to a card that's most likely not going to do much. Now, keeping in mind 2 things. One, it does have an S effect, so playing 3 of them isn't bad, but also the S effect doesn't care if your opponent has 5 costs or what have you. It just get to freeze all of the forwards your opponent controls. So for the Brave control list, an Ice Earth list, or maybe those more slow grindy decks, Vayne is going to be a great card for those types of decks. You know, you have different ways to dull your opponent's forwards. If you want to be really cheeky, you can run Ice and Water and use Ultimacia, so your opponent's forwards come and play dulled anyways, and then just completely lock them out of any 5 drops until they answer this card. But as we know, a 4-drop AK is fairly difficult to answer outside of, say, an Odin or some other effects. So I definitely think Vayne is going to be playable on some field. It's just how often are decks going to want to use this card. But this is one that I'm looking forward to, depending on how the meta shapes up, and could absolutely see a slot of, or this card going to a slot of the control decks. 2-drop Scholar, finally getting to a backup. Choose 1 dull forward, deal it 2,000 damage. I'm not in love with this card. I do love the art, I will say that, but it does cost 1, and the 4 does have to be dulled. In a pinch, the upside is that it is a 2-drop, so you can play it early. It's common, so you can play multiple. And it allows you to, as your opponent attacks, you can block with a, let's say, 4k and trade up to 6k. That's really the best option for this card and what it allows you to do. Now, if you're playing a lot of those lower cost cards anyways, chances are you have a way to buff them already. Maybe you're playing Ice Earth and you have Golem or something of that nature. So I think this card is a nice utility, but it's really going to depend on what type of deck you're playing and what direction you're going in. So again, love the art. It's going to make a beautiful foil, I'm sure, but it does raise a few questions on if it's going to see any play or not. Maybe I'm a Lion. We have a 2-drop 5k, another mannequin. When semblance of a lion blocks or is blocked, choose 1 forward, deal it 2,000 damage. So just like Legendary Squall from Opus 1, it has a less powerful effect that we had seen there. Again, it's in the mannequin, so it can become a 2-drop 6k with X Death. It's a 2-drop, so you can play it off of Golbez as well. And it can trade up to a 7k, or again, bigger if you have X Death, it can trade up potentially to an 8k. So those little increments like that you have to be mindful of, because it can help swing some matches in your favor depending on if you need to be on defense or offense. So something to keep an eye on. If we get more mannequin support, we'll see how it goes, but otherwise this card's going to be very stuck in its position in 1 or 2 decks at most. More Medicans. Now we have Sephiroth, again, following the same tradition with, being a lesser effect of the card, just like the Medicans were in Dissidia. When imaginary champion enters the field, each player discards one card from his or her hand. So the good thing about this, outside of being a common unit, so you can play 3 of them on the field at a time, this does play into the more discard-heavy builds. Now that said, because you're already in Ice, you're likely running the other Sephiroth anyways, which makes your opponent discard 2. Instead of the 1 here, for they both have a drawback to them, I understand, but the other one also has first strike. Yes, it's more expensive, so you have to take that in consideration as well, but we still don't have a good card that's between the two, if you will. So it's going to be interesting. I think discard is a very good archetype, since I don't know another word for it, to be playing with Opus 2, and I think the deck just gets better. But ultimately, I think I would just be playing one of the other versions of this card instead, or maybe just continuing to play Sarah, which it's 1,000 points weaker, but you don't have to discard a card. So again, the advantage here is with Duke, it becomes an 8k, which we all know is relevant. So we'll see how much that will help at C play or not. Edward, we have a Bard finally. Backup, choose one forward and dull it. So the fact that it's named is understandable. Wouldn't want to have multiple of these, but it does cost 2 to activate, so it is a bit costly in that it's a 4-drop, and it does cost quite a bit for the activation. However, you just get to dull any forward. Now, of course, if they're playing Guy, for example, that can be very unfortunate for us, but this card, of course, will also work very well with things like Jill or things like Mustadio, different cards that require your opponent's forwards to be dulled when they might not just be attacking with them to play around certain effects. So Edward's here to force your opponent to dull one of their forwards, and then you get to use one of your effects with it. So this is a card that I absolutely think we'll see play. Again, this is going to be more the control type of decks. As we're going through this, you'll see that control got a noticeable upgrade in terms of what Ice can offer. So I'm very much looking forward to brewing a couple Ice decks. I haven't got there yet because we've been so busy with getting a few more videos out and some other wrap-up things with Opus 1 and not having product in stock yet, but I would not be surprised if we see a Ice control list pop up very, very soon. So Edward, a card I am very much looking forward to. A little expensive, but it does have a very powerful effect when you combo it with the right pieces in your deck. Talking about Edward again, the forward version, all forwards lose haste and forwards cannot gain haste. So 2-drop 5k is a little bit underwhelming. Of course, 6 would be the sweet spot, but having your opponent's forwards lose haste in first strike, just haste, they cannot gain haste, something of the other card that says they cannot gain first strike, it's going to be powerful for turning off those red aggressive decks. Now that said, there's probably some other 2-drops I would rather play, so I don't have to worry about keeping this on the field, and then you don't want to block with it because you want to make sure that they can't gain haste. As we previewed in the last video, Sage is obviously going to be very, very strong, but we're going to see exactly how many forwards have haste and what our opponent's going to be doing with it. So a little underwhelming. I think this card could be good if you're going against a strictly haste-based deck, but it does leave a little bit to be desired. Bard, 2-drop backup. When it enters the field, dull all the backups the opponent controls. So this is a card that combos very nicely with Squall, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but other than that, it's just a 2-drop, which isn't going to be doing a whole lot for you. I would have liked if it had some other effect or secondary effect, but again, for how well it combos with Squall, that can help as well, although Squall has his own benefit anyways. But of course, if they have something like a monk on their side of the field that's recovered, it can help you swing through for some points of damage. So it has some utility, just not a auto include in a lot of the decks. Black Mage. Now this card I am super excited about. It's a 3-drop, so fair costed, but put Black Mage in the break zone. No forward cost 3 or less can attack this turn. Now we already know that a lot of people are on the Firewind unblockable hype train. But a thing not to miss here is that Black Mage can dull itself to generate an Ice Crystal point, and then on your opponent's turn, you just put it into the break zone. So this is a card you don't have to leave active to use the effect. So I absolutely can see us seeing play again in those control decks that are going to be popping up. I think this is absolutely going to be a staple. And we did just kind of need more options in the 3-drop Ice slot. So Black Mage, kudos to you. This is a very, very strong common. that I could definitely see some play. Again, I know some people are going to say it might be restricted because it's 3 cost or less, but sometimes all you need is that 1 extra turn or to be able to avoid that 1 point of damage. Zargaboth, I believe is how you pronounce it, one of the judges who, again, all the judges look sweet. I never really got into 12 because it was just the most linear thing ever. And my brother and I were playing together, just couldn't get it, what have you. So I'm not super familiar with all the judges, so I'm going to butcher their names. I do apologize. But again, we see the effect where you may play a forward of any element except ice of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. So you get to cheat out multiple things. Now, the downside to this is, as a 3-drop 5k, this is a card that we most likely are going to want to party attack with something, and it says any element except ice. Yes, you could be playing, say, a fire ice list, and you could drop a Tifa, for example, or if you want to get really cheeky, you could drop a Godot, if I pronounce it. But again, this is going back to the point I said earlier on, that all these cards are requiring you to have these combos or these setups in your hand, and unless it's doing something very powerful when it enters a field or goes into the battle zone, it's not going to be doing enough for you to keep you in the game or to move you forward. So there are going to be some situations where you're just going to fall behind and not be able to do anything. You play this card like, cool, I have these 3 and 2 drops, great. So I think as we get more cards, something like this does increase in playability as we get more 3 or less drops. So this automatically goes onto my list of cards to watch. And again, I can go on to Mognet, just, select 1, 2, and 3 and look at all the different forwards. But again, it leaves a little bit to be desired. And surprising that it was a rare, I should think it would have at least been a 6k, but we'll see. I think it's a card that has potential to grow as more sets come out. Again, keeping on this theme for whatever reason, Shulk, enters the field, play a forward of any element except ice, 2 or less from your opponent's hand. If you do, so that's where it gets a little interesting, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So again, with this 3-drop 5k, and this is more along the lines with ice being, hey, we're not where we need to be in terms of power level, but you get to put another forward onto the field, and you get to make your opponent discard a card. Again, I personally do not like the very strong focus on having multiple cards in your hand, but I think if you are playing the more aggressive decks, now this is where you get to play a Tifa and make your opponent discard a card. Yes, there's a ton of other options, I know. That's just a good example where you could play this, force your opponent to discard a card, and get in a point of damage. That would be like the miracle play that this card would offer. And of course, it's a 3-drop, so you can play it with some of the other cards we had mentioned previously, with Weiss specifically. So it's a hero, so I want to say it's moving in that playable direction, but this is another card I'm just going to put on the list right away that says if we get more cards that are 2 cost or less and they're great, then sure, I can absolutely see it making it see play. But I tried that 2-drop fire deck very early on in Opus 1 and just ultimately was a bit underwhelmed with it. So we'll see overall what Opus 2 brings, but if someone can make this work, I will be more than happy to preview it on the channel because I love the artwork. It's a great looking card. Shalua, so this is protecting Shulk, which we just talked about. So this is where it does, help push in that direction. But again, I don't like playing these cards that require us to go very heavy in this direction. So it can make it a 3-drop 8k, which is, again, great, giving it plus 2,000 power. And then it can break itself to make it so that it doesn't take any damage for the turn. So again, you can play this very early on, then play your other card, and then just every turn before you play anything, so that while this card is still active, you can just attack away and threaten your opponent to, if they block, you just say, okay, I'm going to just break my back up, your guy dies, and my guy sticks around. So that is where I will say the card does get a lot better, but in a vacuum, it does leave a lot to be desired. So these two together, sure, perfectly fine. You probably do want to run 3 and 3 just for consistency reasons, even though neither one has a special. So that's where it gets a little difficult, but I think that if we find the right deck, we can absolutely make it work, because anytime you have a 3-drop 8K, or even 9K if you play Duke, so that's another way that we can push this in a direction that way, it's going to be great. So again, in a vacuum, with this backup and the other forward, and depending on what deck it's going to be going into, absolutely could see play. But it is going to take a little bit of a deck building effort and making sure that you have the right ratios and you're not just going to draw dead, when you only draw one of the two pieces. Because ultimately this card does effectively nothing by itself other than be a vanilla 2-drop. So we'll see how that goes. Jill, 2-drop backup. Backups don't deal damage to the forwards you control. Nothing really exciting. We haven't seen a lot of really stellar cards. Now, the one thing I will say is that this is a counter to the light backup, which we'll cover in our last video. Fiosa, again, I'm still butchering that, I'm sure. It can't deal 7,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards. So the downside is that if you're playing Ice, you 99 times out of 100 want to be playing the other Jill. So I think you can get away with running this as maybe a 1 or a 2 of, so you can discard the other Jill as a special, and if they happen to be playing that backup, you can use this as well as a counter. But more often than not, unless there's another great backup I'm missing, this card is not what you want to be playing. Again, Ice decks are probably going to use it anyways for the special on the starter Jill, so it's fine to include 1, maybe 2 if you are seeing a lot of the light backup that is seeing play. But I would imagine more people are going to be leaning towards Zemus if I just had to take a meta call analysis view between which one of the two will be more popular, because just dealing damage to your opponent is way better than having to take a point of damage and burning one of their forwards and hopefully killing it. Squall, yay! So here's our box boy, or our poster child for the set. And again, let's just all make sure we're on the same page. That artwork is absolutely gorgeous. So first strike, all right, I like where this is going. For each dull character, now keeping in mind, character is forwards and backups your opponent controls. He gains plus 1,000 power. So I'm like, okay, this is a card that, is going to come down more mid to late game. Your opponent's going to have a few different backups. So I could see at worst, this is going to be an 8K first strike, which is fine. But I think a lot of the times it's going to be even a 9 or 10K. And keeping in mind, when your opponent goes to attack with their first character, let's just assume nothing else is dulled. At a minimum, this is a 7K first strike when they go to attack with something. Again, assuming it doesn't have Brave, what have you. So I love this card. But then it gets better. When he attacks, dull all the backups your opponent controls. So again, most cases it's going to be 2 to 3, so an 8 to 9K is fine. But if you are playing against, per se, another control deck where you're having a very backup heavy match, you have 4 or 5, this becomes a 10K or 11K first strike attacker, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. He's going to be beating the crap out of a lot of different things that your opponent might want to block with. So Squall, I could see fitting into a lot of decks. Now, the only downside is, and these are very different Ice decks that want it, so I will say that, but we do have now 3 very playable Squalls, and only one of them has a special. So it can feel a little terrible to draw multiples of this Squall, or the rare version for Opus 1. Keep that in mind. Again, I think that this Squall goes in a very different deck than what we might expect from the other, the discard Squall. But I am very much looking forward to, again, building a more control deck, having a heavy hitter in the form of Squall, and making it really difficult for my opponent to be blocking this forward. Capricious Reaper, Kuja, when he's chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So again, very similar to what we've seen before. I do like that it's a 4-drop 8K, and it's a common soldier, and it's a mannequin. So in theory, if you want to do a Lightning Ice Golbaz X-Death deck, this could be a 4-drop 9K that your opponent is going to have a difficult time removing. Now, yes, you might just ask why not run the other Kuja. And again, it's really just because you could have multiple of these on the field, and then your opponent has to find a way to answer each one of them, and they're still, in a perfect world, going to be a 9K. So it's difficult to remove through combat, it's difficult to remove by removal, and now you can swarm the field with them. So again, I like it. I really do want to build a Golbez X-Death mannequin deck just to see what direction that goes in. And maybe that we don't use lightning, ice. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be like earth, lightning. If I had to take a guess, I had to look at the rest of the spoilers. But it's going to be interesting to see how this one shakes out. But certainly, I think this is a more playable common than some of the other ones that we've seen so far. Again, it's just going to be locked into a very specific type of deck, where, of course, that's going to be the one downside to it. Time Mage, this was the card I was thinking about. Choose a forward, it loses haste and first strike until end of turn. So I actually really like this card as well for a common. Now, it's a 2-drop, so you can play it early. It's just going to negate all our opponents' Tifa, Onionites, things like that. But it also turns off first strike. Now, many of you might be aware that in our last video for the fire set review, we talked about Belios as well. So this is just a very easy counter to that summon. But first strike is a very good effect in this game. So anytime you have a backup that you can just run as a tech card and don't mind having in there, being able to remove first strike can be extremely, extremely beneficial for your game plan. So I definitely can see Time Mage doing some work in the control decks. And again, there's just so many good 2-drop now backups that those ice control decks want to be using. So the question then becomes, how many of these are we playing? I mostly like it as kind of a 1 to a 2 of, so it's more of a tech choice depending on what your opponent might be playing, because it's not going to be good against every deck. That's just how it is. But I think the effect is good enough where we might want to see this card and have it see play, especially with Lunith, I believe is the name of the fire forward that gives all your standard units haste, for example. So being able to have your opponent play a forward and then just say, no, that's not going anywhere, can be very beneficial. Dr. Sid, which I am super bummed out by this card. When a backup you control is broken by your opponent summons or abilities, your opponent puts one character from his field into the break zone. So a banish effect, which is what that is, your opponent puts one character from his field into the break zone. That is very, very good in pretty much every TCG I've ever played. Now, Dr. Sid is a 2-drop, which is good, but your opponent has to break one of your backups. Yes, I realize this would have been probably too good, but I want to live the dream where this card would have said when a backup you control is broken, your opponent puts one character. So you could use it with like Lulu, or you can be cheeky and use Delita and have a huge swing in your favor. Obviously, too good. That's why it's balanced here. But the downside is that there's not a lot of effects that are being played currently that breaks a backup where this is going to be relevant. Now, the meta might shift and we might see it just a backup destruction deck become relevant. Then sure, play this card. But as it stands right now, and how clogged the 2-drop backup slot already is, and how many other backups you'd rather just be playing, it just doesn't get a spot in, I don't think, any deck right now, which is a huge bummer because it's a hero card, and there's some rares or commons that are going to be more playable than this card. Again, down the road, we might see a meta shift where this is relevant, but ultimately, I'm a little bummed out by this card, and it's just not gonna see a lot of play. So maybe we'll see a meta shift and it'll get more attention, just because I love the artwork on it. Really, that's a sweet as hell outfit. But for where it's at, it's just not what we need currently. And finally, we have the card that goes with Weiss. As we had mentioned, it puts a 3-drop from your hand into the field, which, ta-da! This is the card that you want to be playing. If you control Weiss, it becomes an 8K, so it's a 3-drop 8K, which is fantastic. Then whenever it blocks or is blocked, choose a forward and freeze it. So this is a interesting card for your opponent, because again, if they try to block with something and they attacked it on the previous turn, he's now an 8K. You get to freeze one of their forwards and possibly remove the forward that they're trying to block with, especially if you're playing, let's say, Earth, Ice, and you have battle tricks or what have you. So again, I really want to believe that this combo can work. I think it's a little underwhelming personally, just because I've had such terrible luck with playing cards that say, oh, you need to have the other card in your hand to get a lot of value out of it. So we'll see. Leaves a little bit to be desired, but this can certainly be a very strong card for both the getting 1,000 power out of it and the effect that he gains. So we'll see. A little lackluster right now. But if someone can make that deck work, then all the power to them. And I think we might actually see, this is probably the best combo out of those, play both of these kind of cards together that we've seen from the Ice card specifically. Oh, I love Moogles, and I still wish, as I said in the other video, I wish they would have just done anything, just anything for us with this card. Hurdy, 2-drop backup, dull all the forwards at the cost equal to the number of job Moogle you control. So again, in a realistic world, you're only going to have 2 Moogles, and they're not common units, so like you can't play multiple of them. So you're going to have like Hurdy and Mont Blanc, for example. So you get to dull all 2-cost forwards, which is also terrible because it says all forwards. It doesn't just say your opponents. So if you have a 2-drop forward, so sure, you can play it after you attack. There's a long list of ways to play around that, I understand, but for how much work that this card makes you do, at the very least, you would have expected it to say your opponents, but it doesn't. So, oh well. It's cute as hell, though, so I will be getting foils, but that about ends there for me. Now, a card that I am just sick artwork, amazing effect, and it's an EX burst. Holy shit. Again, I was just ranting about banish effects. 5-drop Mateus, EX burst, opponent puts 1 attacking forward into the break zone. So yes, and there was some confusion about this. If you hit this off the EX burst, it'll still kill that attacking forward. Now, the only possible downside that this card has is that it does cost 5, and that is expensive as hell. That said, it kills Zidane, and as control decks normally have a problem with, it can kill Zidane. So, Zidane, that automatically puts it in my playbook. And again, EX burst, so you can trigger it for free. And Ice just really needed a good removal effect, or removal spell, or even removal S ability, for crying out loud. So, there's, I don't know who in the world to thank for this card, but whoever is off in the distance that gave Ice Control this absurdly good card, thank you. Absolutely thank you so much. I love you. Thank you for this card. It's going to be an amazing foil. So yes, if you are playing an Ice Control deck, jam this card, play 3 of them. You won't regret it. And I am so happy that we finally got something like this. So look forward to an Ice Control deck, you know, being brought up into the meta thanks to this, even just this one card. Obviously, a lot of other things go into that direction with it, but this card certainly helped out the most. 2-drop Moomba, choose a forward, deal it down to its power minus 1,000. I'm not in love with it. There is really cheeky things that you can do with this and say Dancer, or there's a number of other ping effect creatures. Ishtola is another one that can just deal the last 1,000 bit of damage. So if you're making a pinged base deck, sure, but if they have Minwu, then you're SOL. I mean, sure, you can play backup removal, but then you built this entire deck with a theme in mind, and then they have Minwu and it counters it. So that is a bunch of feel bads. So it's a common. At the very least, it's an EX burst, so you can potentially get the effect for free, but I just can't see this seeing much play given the other cards that we have. Again, as more maybe ping base effects come out, or Minwu kind of goes to the wayside, I could see it seeing play then, but as what we'd expect to see for the meta, kind of day one, and if you're in London and everywhere else in the world, you already have that, so yay, but I just don't see this card doing enough until the meta develops a little bit more. Laguna, first strike, which is great for an ice card. When it attacks, choose 1 dull for it and freeze it. The downside here is that the dull and freeze 4-cost Laguna from Opus 1 is just better, or even just the 5-drop version, depending on what deck you're playing, is better as well. So again, this can be neat because we can use a tempo-based effect. First strike is not to be undervalued here either, but it's going to dull and freeze a forward, but it's only a 5k 3-drop. So a bit underpowered, leaves a little bit to be desired, and certainly doesn't do enough, I don't think, compared to the other Lagunas that you're going to be running, because you're already going to have Squall. That's just a guaranteed. So ultimately, I don't think this is going to see a plays, because I just rather run the 4-drop personally. Now, finally, oh yeah, this card is fantastic. And it is so fantastic, it can literally just go on any ice deck that has Squall and Laguna. So, again, as we just talked about, there is a control deck that features both Squall and Laguna. There's a discard deck that also features Squall and Laguna. And there's a more tempo-generated deck that now can also feature Squall and Laguna. So, Rinoa is just absurd. For each category, 8 forward, for Final Fantasy 8 forward specifically, obviously, other than Rinoa you control, she gains 1,000 power. So, it's basically guaranteed at this point. That's usually a 3-drop 8k. All right, already signed me up. We're probably playing Duke, so 3-drop 9k. Yeah, spam the upvotes for this one. When Rinoa is put from the field into the break zone, dull all the forwards your opponent controls. Yeah, I'm super excited. And again, this goes to the fact that if you want to be super cheeky, you could be playing a Earth Ice deck and use, let's say, Delita, break her, dull all your opponent's forwards. It doesn't target, so you can just clear the way. Of course, stupid guy. And then just swing out with the rest of your guys. And that's perfectly fine. So just a card that not only gets absurd stats for the deck that it's already going to be going into, plus has that dull effect. I'm like, yeah, this card's fine. And then it has Wishing Star for crying out loud. Choose one forward and one backup, dull and freeze them both. So if your opponent has Zemus, or if they have a red mage that's bothering you, or if they just have a forward that's giving you hell like Emperor Zandi, there's so many instances where there's going to be a forward you want to dull and freeze, and there's going to be a backup you want to dull and freeze. At a minimum, it's going to resource lock your opponent for a turn. Yes, you have to dull her in the process. I do understand that, but you can do things like block with her, which she's going to be huge, and then dull and freeze their other attacker. So, again, and if they try to kill her, then you're just going to get rid of all their other attackers for the turn. I absolutely love this card. Again, I might be a little biased because Ice is my favorite so far, even though I wasn't a huge Final Fantasy VIII fan. I just love Ice Earth, the tempo discard deck. It's more discard than tempo, my apologies. And this is just an auto include. Like, it's a great card. And I cannot wait to see all the different decks that people are able to fit this into. So with that in mind, I was really upset when they made her the tutor. So that is a huge bummer. Obviously, you can't really run both of them unless you also have Delita, so then you can break this back up, but it's really messy. So I get it. They probably didn't want to make Final Fantasy VIII themed deck too good, so that was kind of the limitation that they had to make, and they just couldn't make this another character. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. So ultimately, if you have the option between the two, it's very rare that you're going to pick the Legend version, or that you're going to not pick the Legend version. That said, as we get more sets, tutors should never be written off. Same with Jesse, same with Brother, same with all of those cards. Anytime a card specifically states, search for this one category, and we are playing a game where you have specials and how strong all of those effects can be, this is a card that you just have to keep in mind going forward. So again, I don't think it's really going to see a lot of play probably for the entire duration of Opus 2, but come Opus 3, 4, 5, who knows maybe how much further down the road when we get more Final Fantasy VIII characters and we just get, let's say, the best Squall ever that beats all other Squalls. We want to have a card that, in the same reasoning as Jesse for Light Cloud, we just want to run Jesse because it's an extra Light Cloud in the deck, meaning if you find Jesse, you can just tutor up a Light Cloud. And this card follows that same exact principle. So, again, not that great right now. We're going to see how the meta shapes up, but ultimately, down the road, eventually, someday, this will see play. But, of course, that is the last card. But wait, we have the last picks. So none of these should be a surprise yet again, based on how much I talked about them. Rinoa is just the takeaway card. Again, might be slightly biased. I think Vayne is great as well, but overall, in terms of what has more flexibility and what you can just automatically run a 3 of and not feel terrible about, considering you're already running Squall and Laguna, is going to be Rinoa. Squall gets a hero slot just because it's another great attacker and can be great on defense as well. And this is really just a card that we've kind of been wanting in Ice as another heavy hitter. Now, that is something that Ice has lacked up until this point. That is a unconditional heavy hitter on its own. Now, yes, both Rinoa and Squall are a little bit conditional in themselves, but they're certainly a lot better than what we've seen previously. So these two cards combined, I could absolutely see going into a deck very soon. For rare, we have Mateus, the Corrupt. Thank you, base Square Enix, whoever I need to thank for that. Thank you. I can't say it enough. And then Black Mage for the last spot. The common was a little bit of a toss-up between a few. But I think anytime you're able to say that, no, you don't get a combat phase this turn except maybe one guy, that's probably good enough. That's worth mentioning. So that got the common slot. So there you have it, folks. There's our 4 picks from the Ice of Opus 2. That's our full set review. Again, this is just a very early impression of what the different cards are. Obviously, we're going to see how the meta develops, and that's going to have a lot of influence on whether some of these cards are played or not. So 2 months from now, I could be completely wrong. Would not be surprised. But I think at base level, probably more correct on some of these picks than the others, and that's fine to miss a few along the way. So, of course, as always, let us know in the comments below what are your top 4 picks. I think we'll just do this for every video. Pick your 4 favorite cards, 1 of each rarity, and let us know. And of course, thank you so much for continuing to support the channel. We appreciate all your likes, all the comments. We love getting back to everyone when we can. And make sure to subscribe for all future Final Fantasy TCG content. So tons of more stuff coming for you guys. I absolutely look forward to it. And make sure to check out other set reviews. So until next time, make sure to watch our next 6 Sages Gaming video. Have a good one.